The courthouse stood tall and intimidating on a bright Tuesday morning, its stone steps already crowded with people coming and going. Among them was a young man who looked no older than 18, though he was actually 19. Alex Lee moved, slowly up the steps, constantly adjusting his oversized hoodie and trying to keep his backpack from sliding off his narrow shoulders. His hair stuck out in all directions, looking like he had just rolled out of bed, which wasn't far from the truth. Inside, the polished marble hallway echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Alex glanced down at the crumpled paper in his hand, double-checking the courtroom number. Room 306. His sneakers squeaked against the floor as he made his way to the elevator, earning him annoyed looks from the well-dressed lawyers rushing past. "Going up?" asked a woman in a crisp navy suit, her briefcase probably worth more than everything Alex owned. "Yeah, third floor," he mumbled, shoving his hands into his pockets. The woman looked him up and down, her eyebrows rising slightly. "Court appearance?" Alex nodded. "Your lawyer meeting you there?" she asked, her tone softening a bit. "No lawyer," Alex replied. "I'm on my own." The woman's eyes widened. "Pro se? For what kind of case? Property dispute? Against Riverbend Development?" The elevator dinged open, saving Alex from having to explain further, but not before he caught the look of pity that crossed the woman's face. He'd seen that look dozens of times already. Poor kid, and over his head. The hallway on the third floor bustled with activity. Alex shuffled toward room 306, his heart pounding harder with each step. Through the doors, the courtroom was already half full. Men and women in expensive suits clustered around the plaintiff's table, their leather portfolios and laptops spread out like they owned the place, which in a way they did. Alex slid into a bench in the back row, trying to be invisible. He watched as more people filtered in, mostly lawyers and legal assistants by the look of them. The clock on the wall ticked, closer to 9. His mouth felt dry, and he wished he'd remembered to bring a water bottle. At precisely 9 o'clock, a side door opened and the bailiff entered. "All rise. The Court of Common Pleas is now in session, the Honorable Judge Patricia Winters presiding." Everyone stood as a stern-looking woman in black robes swept into the room and took her place at the bench. Judge Winters was in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face seemed permanently set in an expression of mild disapproval. "Be seated," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The bailiff began reading the day's docket. Alex tried to control his breathing as he waited for his case to be called. Around him, lawyers whispered to clients, papers rustled, and someone's phone buzzed before being hastily silenced. Case number 2025 CV 4872, Riverbend Development Corporation versus Lee. Alex's legs felt wobbly as he stood. This was it. He made his way to the defendant's table, his backpack caught on the gate of the gallery as he passed through, causing him to stumble. A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Judge Winters frowned. 5 people rose at the plaintiff's table. Their lead attorney, a tall man with silver hair and a tan that screamed country club membership, stepped forward. "Thomas Blackwell, Your Honor, representing Riverbend Development Corporation. With me are my associates, Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Patel, as well as Mr. James Wilson, CEO of Riverbend, and his executive assistant, Ms. Chen." Judge Winters nodded, then turned her attention to Alex, who was still trying to organize his papers. His backpack had fallen over, spilling a half-eaten energy bar onto the floor. "And you are?" the judge asked, impatience clear in her tone. Alex scrambled to his feet. "Alex Lee, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." Judge Winters peered at him over her reading glasses. "Mr. Lee, are you aware that you're facing one of the largest development corporations in the state?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you've chosen to represent yourself rather than hire an attorney?" "I can't afford one, Your Honor." A barely concealed snort came from the plaintiff's table. Judge Winters shot them a look before turning back to Alex. "Have you considered legal aid? There are resources available for those who cannot afford representation." "I tried, Your Honor. They're overloaded with cases. Said mine wasn't a priority." Judge Winters sighed, making no effort to hide her frustration. Very well. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed with your motion. Thomas Blackwell rose smoothly to his feet. Your Honor, we've filed a motion for summary judgment. The facts in this case are clear. Mr. Lee's grandmother signed a binding agreement to sell her property to Riverbend Development 5 years ago. She received fair market value for the land. Mr. Lee's claim that she was coerced or misled is without merit and unsupported by any evidence. The judge nodded. Mr. Lee, your response? Alex fumbled with his papers, dropping several on the floor. As he bent to pick them up, he heard more snickering from the plaintiff's table. Sorry, Your Honor, he mumbled, his face burning. My grandmother was 82 years old when they got her to sign those papers. She had early-stage dementia. It wasn't diagnosed yet, but we have medical records from just 3 months later that confirm it. Do you have those records with you? Judge Winters asked. Yes, Your Honor. Alex dug through his disorganized pile. They're here somewhere. While Mr. Lee searches for his documentation, Blackwell interjected smoothly, I'd like to point out that the agreement was notarized, and the notary has provided an affidavit stating that Mrs. Lee appeared fully competent at the time of signing. Judge R. Winters nodded. That is significant, Mr. Blackwell. Alex finally pulled out a folder. Here it is, Your Honor. These are my grandmother's medical records from Dr. Wilson at Memorial Hospital. He approached the bench to hand over the documents, tripping slightly on the way. Someone in the gallery coughed to cover a laugh. Judge Winters took the folder and flipped through it with a skeptical expression. Mr. Lee, these records show that your grandmother was evaluated for possible cognitive decline 3 months after signing the agreement. There's no definitive diagnosis of dementia at that time, merely a recommendation for further testing. But she got worse really fast after that, Your Honor, Alex said earnestly. By the end of that year, she couldn't even remember my name sometimes. There's no way she understood what she was signing. Convenient timing, murmured one of Riverbend's attorneys, just loud enough to be heard. Judge Winters frowned. Mr. Lee, I understand your concern for your grandmother, but the court requires evidence, not speculation, about her mental state at the specific time of signing. But I have. Furthermore, the judge continued, cutting him off, property law doesn't allow for casual undoing of contracts simply because a family member later regrets the decision. It's not about regret, Alex insisted, his voice rising slightly. It's about them taking advantage of an elderly woman who wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Lee, Judge Winters said sharply, watch your tone in my courtroom. Sorry, Your Honor, Alex said, deflating. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying him. Mr. Lee, how old are you? 19, Your Honor. 19, she repeated with a slight shake of her head. And you believe you understand property law well enough to challenge a legally executed contract? Alex swallowed hard. I've been studying, Your Honor, at the library and online. A ripple of amusement went through the courtroom. Even Judge Winters' lips twitched. Studying at the library, she echoed. Mr. Lee, this isn't a high school debate. This is a court of law. There are procedures, precedents, and principles that take legal professionals years to master. I know it seems like I'm out of my depth, Alex admitted, but this land meant everything to my grandmother. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Sentimentality is not a legal argument, Judge Winters said, her tone softening just slightly. Mr. Lee, I strongly advise you to seek proper legal counsel. This court can grant a continuance to allow you time to find representation. Before Alex could respond, Thomas Blackwell stood again. Your Honor, if I may, Riverbend has already delayed this project for 6 months due to Mr. Lee's unfounded claims. Every day of delay costs my client thousands of dollars. We respectfully request that the motion for summary judgment be granted today. Judge Winters considered this, then turned back to Alex. Mr. Lee, do you have any legitimate legal basis for opposing the summary judgment motion? Any evidence that would create a genuine issue of material fact? Alex hesitated, his mind racing. He had spent weeks preparing, reading everything he could find about property law and contracts. But faced with the judge's stern gaze and the confident smirks of Riverbend's legal team, his carefully rehearsed arguments seemed to evaporate. I believe the contract might be void due to unconscionability, he said finally, remembering a term from his research. Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. Unconscionability? On what grounds? The price they paid was way below market value, Your Honor, and my grandmother didn't have anyone with her when they came to get her signature. No family, no lawyer. Just her alone with 3 Riverbend representatives. Judge Winters glanced at the file in front of her. The sale price was $175,000 for 5 acres of undeveloped land. Mr. Blackwell, was this below market value at the time? Not at all, Your Honor, Blackwell replied smoothly. We have an independent appraisal from that period valuing the property at $180,000. Riverbend's offer was entirely reasonable. Alex shook his head. But that land is worth at least twice. That now. Now, perhaps, Judge Winters said, but contracts are evaluated based on conditions at the time of signing, not future potential value. She studied Alex for a moment longer, then sighed. Mr. Lee, I'm going to be frank with you. You seem like a well-meaning young man who cares deeply about his grandmother's property. But this court deals in legal facts, not emotions. Based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to grant the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment. Alex felt his heart sink. The room seemed to spin around him as he realized he was about to lose everything his family had worked for. His grandmother had loved that land, had told him stories about growing up there, about the trees his great-grandfather had planted. However, Judge Winters continued, surprising everyone, I will grant you one final opportunity. This court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9. I strongly advise you to find legal representation before then, Mr. Lee. That's all for today. With a bang of her gavel, Judge Winters rose, and everyone in the courtroom stood as she exited. As soon as she was gone, the room filled with the buzz of conversation. The Riverbend team gathered their things, looking annoyed at the delay but confident in their eventual victory. Alex slowly packed his scattered papers back into his backpack, his movements mechanical. Tomorrow. He had until tomorrow to figure something out, but what? Legal aid had already turned him down. He couldn't afford a real lawyer. It seemed hopeless. As he turned to leave, he noticed Thomas Blackwell watching him with an almost pitying expression. The older attorney approached, lowering his voice. Look, kid, this is just a word of advice. Stop wasting everyone's time. That land is going to be developed whether you fight it or not. Sometimes you have to know when you're beaten. Alex looked him straight in the eye. My grandmother taught me never to give up on something that matters. See you tomorrow, Mr. Blackwell. With that, he walked out of the courtroom, his mind already turning over possibilities. He had one night to find a miracle. Alex pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and stepped into the late morning sunshine. The world seemed to be moving in slow motion around him. Business people hurried past, talking on phones. Couples walked, hand in hand. A food truck vendor called out lunch specials. None of them knew or cared that he had just watched his family's legacy slip through his fingers. He sat heavily on a bench, his backpack slumping beside him. What now? Judge Winters had given him until tomorrow, but what could possibly change by then? He couldn't magically become a legal expert overnight. He couldn't afford a lawyer. His grandmother was counting on him even if she no longer remembered exactly why. Rough day in court? Alex looked up to see an older man sitting at the other end of the bench. He wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. A worn leather messenger bag rested between them. That obvious, huh? Alex asked. The man smiled. Let's just say I know that look. It's the, I just got steamrolled by the legal system face. Alex sighed. Yeah, that about sums it up. Property. Case? Alex blinked in surprise. How did you know? Riverbend Development, right? Those vultures have been buying up half the county. I've seen at least a dozen cases like yours come through. The man held out his hand. I'm Tom, by the way. Alex. They shook hands. Do you work at the courthouse? Tom chuckled. Something like that. I used to be a court reporter before I retired. Still come by sometimes out of habit. After 40 years, it's hard to break the routine. Alex nodded, absently, his mind still racing through impossible solutions. Want to talk about it? Tom asked. Sometimes it helps to get a fresh perspective. Something about the old man's kind eyes made Alex decide to trust him. He explained about his grandmother's land, her declining health, and how Riverbend had swooped in just as her memory started to fail. The worst part is I know they took advantage of her, Alex said, his voice tight with frustration. But I can't prove it. Not legally, anyway. And that judge... He trailed off, remembering Judge Winter's dismissive tone. Ah, you got Winters, Tom said, nodding knowingly. Let's say she has high standards. She looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, Alex muttered. Don't take it personally, she's been on the bench for almost 20 years. Sees a lot of people who don't know what they're doing waste the court's time. Tom paused. Though between you and me, she's gotten a bit too comfortable with the big corporate lawyers. They speak her language, know the right phrases to drop. Alex scuffed his sneaker against the pavement. Yeah, well, I clearly don't speak judge. So what's your plan for tomorrow? I don't have one, Alex admitted. I tried legal aid, but they're swamped. I've been teaching myself law from library books and internet searches, but... He gestured helplessly. Tom was quiet for a moment, studying him. You know, not many 19-year-olds would fight this hard. Most would have given up by now. It's not just about the land, Alex said. It's what it represents. My great-grandfather built the house with his own hands. My grandmother was born there. After my parents died, that place was all we had left. Tom nodded thoughtfully. What did you learn? In your research? A bunch of legal terms that don't make sense, Alex said with a half-laugh. Unconscionability, equitable estoppel, undue influence. I tried to bring up unconscionability today, but the judge shut me down pretty quick. Tom reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a notebook and pen. Sometimes the trick isn't knowing the terms, but knowing how to use them. He scribbled something down. Try this angle tomorrow. He tore out the page and handed it to Alex, who skimmed it with growing confusion. Procedural unconscionability, based on disparity of bargaining power? Alex read aloud. I don't even know what that means. It means your grandmother was in a weaker position when negotiating, due to her age and beginning cognitive decline. And Riverbend, with their team of lawyers and business experts, took advantage of that imbalance. Alex looked up sharply. That's exactly what happened. The key is how you present it, Tom continued. You need to cite the right cases. Patterson vs. ITT Consumer Financial Corp is a good one. And Williams vs. Walker Thomas Furniture Company is the classic precedent. How do you know all this? Alex asked, surprised. Tom smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I picked up a few things over the years. Court reporters hear everything, you know. He wrote down a few more notes and passed them to Alex. Look these up tonight. And if you really want to rattle Blackwell's cage, ask about the Harper Creek properties. What's Harper Creek? Another development Riverbend took over last year. There were irregularities in how they acquired the land. Nothing that stuck legally, but it might make them nervous if you bring it up. Alex folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his pocket. I don't know how to thank you. Tom waved him off. Don't thank me yet. You've still got a tough fight ahead. Judge Winters won't be easily swayed. But this gives me something to work with, Alex said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since entering the courthouse. One more thing, Tom said, reaching into his bag again. He pulled out a slim book with a worn cover. This might help. It's a guide to courtroom procedure and etiquette. The little things matter with judges like Winters. Alex took the book gratefully. I should get going. I've got a lot to read before tomorrow. Good luck, son, Tom said. And remember, half of winning in court is believing you can. As Alex walked away, clutching his new resources, he didn't notice Tom pull out a phone and make a quick call. The rest of the day passed in a blur of research and preparation. Alex camped out at the public library until closing time, hunched over legal textbooks and using the free computers to look up the cases Tom had mentioned. By the time he trudged back to his small apartment, his head was swimming with legal terms and precedents. His grandmother's old wooden desk was soon covered with notes. Alex worked through the night, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. He practiced speaking the unfamiliar legal phrases out loud, rehearsing his arguments until the words felt natural on his tongue. Around 3 in the morning, he found something interesting about Riverbend's Harper Creek development. A newspaper article mentioning complaints from elderly residents who claimed they'd been pressured to sell. The story hadn't gone anywhere, but it established a pattern that might support his case. When his alarm blared at 6 a.m., Alex had managed only 2 hours of restless sleep. His eyes burned, and his back ached from hunching over books all night. But as he showered and dressed, he felt different from the day before, more focused, more prepared. He chose his clothes carefully, the nicest he owned, though still far from the tailored suits of Riverbend's attorneys. A pair of dark blue jeans, without any tears or fading, a button-up shirt freshly ironed, his only pair of dress shoes polished as best he could. In the bathroom mirror, he attempted to tame his unruly hair with water and his fingers, achieving marginal success. The face that looked back at him was young, too young, some might say, to be fighting this battle. But his eyes showed a determination that hadn't been there yesterday. Alex arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early, his backpack now organized with neatly labeled folders instead of loose papers. He found a quiet corner in the hallway outside courtroom 306 and reviewed his notes one last time. Right on schedule, the Riverbend team arrived looking confident and relaxed. Thomas Blackwell spotted Alex and raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see him there early and looking somewhat more put together. "Mr. Lee," Blackwell acknowledged with a nod. "I see you've decided to join us again." "Wouldn't miss it," Alex replied, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. Something in Alex's tone made Blackwell pause. He studied the young man for a moment, then shrugged and turned away to confer with his associates. At 9 sharp, the bailiff called everyone into the courtroom. Judge Winters swept in, looking just as stern as the day before. "Be seated," she commanded. "We're here to continue case number 2025 CV 4872, Riverbend Development Corporation versus Lee. I understand the defendant has not obtained counsel." Alex rose to his feet. "That's correct, Your Honor. I will continue to represent myself." "Judge," Winters sighed. "Very well, Mr. Lee. Are you prepared to respond to the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment?" "Yes, Your Honor," Alex said, his voice steadier than yesterday. He walked to the podium without tripping or dropping anything, a small victory in itself. "Before I begin, I'd like to thank the court for granting me this additional time to prepare my response." Alex's words were measured, respectful. He'd read in Tom's book that judges appreciated proper courtroom etiquette. Judge Winters looked slightly surprised at his improved demeanor, but simply nodded for him to continue. "Your Honor, I believe Riverbend's contract with my grandmother should be voided on the grounds of procedural unconscionability," Alex began, pronouncing the legal term carefully. He saw a flicker of surprise cross Blackwell's face. As established in Patterson v. ITT Consumer Financial Corp., procedural unconscionability concerns the manner in which an agreement is reached, including the disparity in bargaining power between the parties. Judge Winters' eyebrows rose slightly. She leaned forward, giving Alex her full attention for the first time. "In this case," Alex continued, gaining confidence, "there was a severe imbalance of power. On one side, a corporate entity with a team of legal experts. On the other, an elderly woman showing early signs of cognitive decline, without family members or legal representation present." Alex pulled out the medical records he'd organized overnight. "Your Honor, I've highlighted the relevant portions of my grandmother's medical evaluation. While it's true that she wasn't officially diagnosed with dementia until later, her doctor noted concerns about her decision-making capacity 3 months before she signed Riverbend's contract." He handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. This time she took more time reviewing them. "Furthermore," Alex continued, his heart pounding but his voice steady, "I believe Riverbend was aware of my grandmother's vulnerability. This wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern. Thomas Blackwell stood up abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Lee is making baseless accusations against my client. I have evidence to support this claim, Alex said quickly. The Harper Creek development? Blackwell's face darkened. Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to the case at hand. Judge Winters held up a hand to silence them both. For a long moment she looked back and forth between Alex and Blackwell, as if seeing something new in this familiar scenario. Mr. Lee, she said finally, you've raised some interesting points. However, I'll need more than just allegations of a pattern of behavior. Do you have any concrete evidence that Riverbend knew about your grandmother's condition when they approached her? Alex hesitated. This was the weak point in his argument. Not directly, Your Honor, but then I'm afraid. However, Alex continued, taking a chance by interrupting the judge. Under the precedent established in Williams v. Walker Thomas Furniture Company, the court can consider whether the seller had reason to know of the buyer's lack of reasonable opportunity. To understand the terms, Judge Winters blinked, clearly not expecting such a specific legal citation from someone she'd dismissed as a clueless teenager just yesterday. The courtroom had gone completely silent, all eyes on the unlikely legal battle unfolding before them. Even the Riverbend team had stopped their whispered conversations, watching Alex with new wariness. Judge Winters tapped her pen against her desk, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Lee, your argument has merit. I'd like to hear more about how you believe this precedent applies to your case. As Alex began to explain, drawing on his night of intensive research, he caught a glimpse of Tom sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, a small smile on his face. Something had shifted. The judge was listening, really listening. For the first time since this fight began, Alex allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. The morning session stretched into afternoon as Alex continued his argument. With each passing hour, his voice grew more confident, his legal points more focused. The courtroom, which had initially hummed with whispered mockery, now sat in attentive silence. Your Honor, Alex said, I'd like to submit these property assessment records from the county tax office. He handed a folder to the bailiff. They show that just 2 months after purchasing my grandmother's land for $175,000, Riverbend listed its value at $425,000 in their corporate portfolio. Judge Winters reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Mr. Blackwell, would you care to explain this discrepancy? Thomas Blackwell rose smoothly to his feet, though Alex noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Your Honor, the higher valuation reflects Riverbend's development plans for the property. Raw land naturally increases in value once approved for development. But these documents are dated before any development plans were submitted to the county, Alex countered, before any zoning changes or permits were requested. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Winters tapped her gavel once, restoring silence. Mr. Lee raises an interesting point, she said. If the land was truly worth only $175,000 at purchase, what accounts for its value more than doubling within 8 weeks, prior to any official development activity? Blackwell cleared his throat. Market fluctuations, Your Honor. The real estate market in that area was particularly volatile that quarter. Is that so? Judge Winters turned to Alex. Do you have any evidence regarding market conditions during that period? For a moment, Alex faltered. He hadn't thought to research historical market trends, but then he remembered something from his grandmother's tax paperwork. Your Honor, my grandmother's property tax assessment from the same quarter shows local land values increased by only 3% during that period. He quickly sorted through his files. Here, the county assessor's report. As Judge Winters examined the new document, Alex caught Tom's eye across the courtroom. The older man gave him a subtle nod of approval. Judge Winters looked up, her gaze sharp. Mr. Blackwell, a 242% increase in value seems difficult to attribute to a market that rose 3% overall. Blackwell's team huddled in whispered consultation. Alex could sense their growing discomfort. Your Honor, Blackwell said finally, these are internal corporate valuations meant for shareholders. They often include speculative projections. So, Riverbend was telling its shareholders this land was worth $425,000, while assuring Mrs. Lee that $175,000 was a fair price? Judge Winters asked pointedly. That's not precisely... It seems precisely the point, Mr. Blackwell. Judge Winters turned back to Alex. Mr. Lee, please continue. Alex felt a surge of confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to address the manner in which my grandmother was approached by Riverbend representatives. For the next hour, Alex methodically laid out how 3 Riverbend agents had visited his grandmother repeatedly over a 2-week period, always when she was alone. He presented phone records showing multiple calls to her home, sometimes late in the evening when elderly people might be more confused or tired. Your Honor, Alex said, his voice growing passionate. They visited 5 times before getting her signature. Each time they brought new documents, made new promises, they wore her down. Objection, Blackwell interjected. This is pure speculation. Mr. Lee wasn't present during these meetings. I have evidence, Alex replied calmly. He held up a small, worn notebook. My grandmother kept a visitor log by her phone, something her doctor suggested to help with her memory. She recorded every visit, including how long they stayed and what they discussed. He handed the notebook to the bailiff. You'll notice the entries become increasingly confused toward the end. On the day she signed, she wrote that the nice men said I needed to sign today or lose everything. Judge Winters studied the notebook, her expression grave. Mr. Blackwell, were your clients aware of Mrs. Lee's memory issues during these visits? Absolutely not, Your Honor, Blackwell insisted. Mrs. Lee appeared perfectly competent. Yet these entries clearly showed deteriorating cognitive function, Judge Winters observed, turning a page. And your representatives continued to pursue her signature despite these signs. The courtroom grew tense as Blackwell and his team whispered urgently among themselves. Alex watched them, realizing for the first time that they seemed genuinely worried. Judge Winters checked the clock on the wall. It's nearly 3 o'clock. I think we could all use a brief recess. This court will reconvene in 15 minutes. As the judge left the bench, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Alex sank into his chair, suddenly aware of how tired he was. He hadn't slept properly in days, and the adrenaline that had carried him through the morning was beginning to fade. You're doing well, came a quiet voice behind him. Tom had moved to sit in the gallery just behind the defendant's table. Better than I expected, honestly. Thanks to your help, Alex said gratefully. Tom shook his head. I just gave you a push in the right direction. The research, the presentation, that's all you. They look worried. Alex nodded toward the Riverbend team, who were huddled in intense discussion at the far end of the courtroom. They should be, Tom said with satisfaction. You've done something they didn't expect. What's that? You've made Judge Winters doubt her first impression. Tom leaned forward. Judges like her see hundreds of cases. They have to make quick judgments. Once they've sized you up, it's incredibly hard to change their mind. Alex frowned. But why did she dismiss me so quickly yesterday? Just because I'm young? Partly that, Tom admitted. But mostly because pro se defendants, people representing themselves, usually don't know what they're doing. They waste the court's time with irrelevant arguments and misunderstood legal concepts. And I looked exactly like that kind of defendant, Alex said, understanding dawning. Complete with messy hair and a backpack spilling its contents. Tom agreed with a slight smile. But now you've shown her something different. You've earned her respect. That's no small thing. Before Alex could respond, he noticed Thomas Blackwell approaching their table. Tom slipped away quietly, blending back into the gallery crowd. Lee, Blackwell said, his voice low. A word? Alex stood to face him. What is it? My clients are concerned about the direction this hearing is taking. Blackwell glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. We're prepared to make an offer to settle this matter out of court. Alex blinked in surprise. A settlement? Riverbend would return the property to your grandmother, Blackwell continued, in exchange for a full refund of the purchase price plus reasonable compensation for administrative costs. Alex could hardly believe what he was hearing. Yesterday, this man had told him to give up. Now he was offering to return the land? And what else? Alex asked, suddenly suspicious. Blackwell's expression tightened. We would require a confidentiality agreement, of course. The terms of the settlement would remain private. You mean you don't want anyone to know you took advantage of an elderly woman with dementia? Alex translated. That is not what happened, Blackwell snapped, then quickly composed himself. This is a generous offer, Mr. Lee. I suggest you consider it carefully. I'll need to see the exact terms in writing, Alex said. Of course. I'll have something drafted during the recess. Blackwell turned to go, then paused. I'm curious. Where did you learn about the Harper Creek properties? Alex just smiled. Research, Mr. Blackwell, lots of research. As Blackwell walked away, Alex felt a rush of emotions. Relief, pride, exhaustion, and a growing suspicion that there was more to this case than he realized. If Riverbend was willing to return the land so quickly, what were they afraid might come out in court? He made his way to where Tom sat in the gallery. They offered to settle. They'll give back the land. Tom nodded thoughtfully. That's not surprising. Corporations like Riverbend hate public scrutiny almost as much as they hate losing money. Should I take it? Alex asked. What does your gut tell you? Alex considered the question. Something feels off. They gave in too easily, and they seemed really nervous about Harper Creek. Good instincts, Tom said approvingly. When a powerful opponent suddenly offers what you want, always ask why. The bailiff called for order as Judge Winters returned to the bench. Everyone scrambled back to their places. Before we continue, Judge Winters announced, I understand the parties have engaged in settlement discussions. Have you reached an agreement? Blackwell stood. We're in preliminary talks, Your Honor. Riverbend has made an offer that would return the property to Mrs. Lee. We've requested a brief adjournment to finalize the details. Judge Winters turned to Alex. Mr. Lee, are you satisfied with this development? Alex rose slowly to his feet, aware that everyone was watching him. Yesterday, he would have jumped at this offer. Today, something held him back. Your Honor, while I appreciate Riverbend's willingness to return my grandmother's land, I'm concerned about the broader implications of this case. Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. Broader implications? Yes, Your Honor. Alex took a deep breath. During my research, I discovered that Riverbend has acquired properties from at least 7 elderly residents in similar circumstances. The Harper Creek development I mentioned earlier involved 3 senior citizens who now claim they were pressured into selling. Blackwell was on his feet instantly. Objection. This is completely irrelevant to the current case. Is it? Alex countered. Or is it evidence of a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable elderly homeowners? The courtroom fell silent. Judge Winters studied Alex with an intensity that would have terrified him yesterday. Today, he met her gaze steadily. Mr. Lee, she said finally, are you suggesting that you wish to continue these proceedings rather than accept Riverbend's settlement offer? I am, Your Honor, Alex replied, surprising himself with his certainty. This isn't just about my grandmother's land anymore. It's about protecting others from being taken advantage of. Judge Winters nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in her eyes. Very well. Mr. Blackwell, you may continue your cross-examination of Mr. Lee's evidence. As Blackwell approached the podium, visibly flustered, Alex caught sight of Tom watching from the gallery. The older man's expression was impossible to read, but there was something there, surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction. What Alex didn't see was the small smile that curved Judge Winters' lips as she watched this unlikely legal battle unfold before her. For the first time in years, Patricia Winters was genuinely curious about how a case in her courtroom would turn out. And behind his confident exterior, Thomas Blackwell was growing increasingly uneasy. This teenager in wrinkled clothes was supposed to be an easy win, a footnote in Riverbend's expansion plans. Instead, he was becoming a serious problem, a problem that needed to be contained, and quickly, before he uncovered things that Riverbend had worked very hard to keep buried. The afternoon. wore on as Blackwell tried to regain control of the proceedings. His questions grew increasingly pointed, his tone more aggressive, but Alex remained calm, answering with a clarity that surprised even himself. "Mr. Lee," Blackwell said, pacing before the bench, "you've presented various documents and claims today, but the fact remains that your grandmother signed a legally binding contract. Her signature appears on every page, initialed at every required point. Are you suggesting she was somehow forced to sign?" "Not physically forced," Alex replied. "But pressured and manipulated, yes. And yet you have no direct evidence of this." "Alleged manipulation," Blackwell pressed. "Just your grandmother's notebook and your own speculation." "I also have the timing of events," Alex countered. "Riverbend representatives visited my grandmother 5 times in 2 weeks. The final visit, when she signed, lasted over 4 hours according to her log. 4 hours with an 82-year-old woman who had already shown signs of confusion." Judge Winters leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwell, why did this final meeting take 4 hours?" Blackwell hesitated. "I would have to consult with my clients about the specific details of that meeting, Your Honor." "Please do," Judge Winters said. "I find it concerning that representatives would spend 4 hours with an elderly person to secure a signature." As Blackwell conferred with the Riverbend executives, Alex noticed a subtle shift in the courtroom atmosphere. Several people in the gallery were taking notes now, and he spotted a woman who looked like a reporter scribbling furiously in a small notebook. "Your Honor," Blackwell said finally, "my clients informed me that the length of the meeting was due to Mrs. Lee's own questions and concerns. They were simply being thorough in addressing all her points." "How considerate," Judge Winters remarked, her tone making it clear she wasn't convinced. Alex decided to take a risk. "Your Honor, may I present one more piece of evidence?" Judge Winters nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Lee." Alex reached into his backpack and removed a small digital voice recorder. "My grandmother kept this by her phone. She used it to record reminders to herself, grocery lists, medication times, things like that." The courtroom grew very still. The day before she signed the Riverbend contract, she accidentally left it running during a visit from their representatives. Alex placed the recorder on the table. "I only discovered this recording last night." Thomas Blackwell's face paled. "Your Honor, any such recording would be inadmissible. Mrs. Lee's state of California is a 2-party consent state for recordings." "Actually," Alex said, "the recording was made inadvertently, not intentionally for the purpose of recording a conversation. Under California law, that falls under different legal standards." Judge Winters looked impressed despite herself. "That's correct, Mr. Lee. However, I would need to review the circumstances before ruling on admissibility." "I understand, Your Honor." Alex pushed the recorder forward. "I'd like to submit this as potential evidence subject to your review." Judge Winters nodded to the bailiff, who collected the recorder. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. While I review this recording in chambers, we'll reconvene at 4:15 p.m. As the judge left the bench, the courtroom erupted in conversation. The Riverbend team immediately huddled together, their expressions tense. Alex sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. Tom appeared beside him. "A recording? You never mentioned that before." "I wasn't sure if it would be allowed," Alex admitted. "And honestly, I only found it when I was going through her things last night, looking for anything that might help." "What's on it?" Alex's expression darkened. "One of their guys telling my grandmother that if she didn't sell to them, the county would take her land through eminent domain anyway, and she'd get nothing." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "That's a blatant lie." "Exactly. There was no eminent domain plan. They made it up to scare her." "If Judge Winters allows that recording," Tom said, "Riverbend is in serious trouble." Across the courtroom, the tension at the plaintiff's table was palpable. Blackwell was having what appeared to be a heated discussion with the Riverbend CEO, while their other attorneys frantically flipped through documents. "They're scared," Alex observed. "They should be," Tom replied. "Fraudulent misrepresentation could invalidate the contract entirely, and if this went public, it could affect all their other land deals," Alex finished. Tom studied him with new respect. You know, you've got good instincts for this. Ever thought about becoming a lawyer? Alex laughed. After this experience, I think I've had enough of courtrooms for a lifetime. The 30-minute recess stretched to 45 minutes, then an hour. The longer Judge Winters remained in chambers, the more agitated the Riverbend team became. Blackwell left the courtroom, twice to make phone calls, returning looking increasingly grim. Finally, at nearly 5:30 p.m., the bailiff called the court back to order. Judge Winters returned to the bench, her expression unreadable. Having reviewed the recording submitted by Mr. Lee, she began, I find it admissible under the inadvertent recording exception. Furthermore, its contents are troubling, to say the least. She fixed Blackwell with a steely gaze. Mr. Blackwell, would you care to explain why Riverbend representatives told Mrs. Lee that her property was subject to imminent eminent domain proceedings when no such plans existed? Blackwell stood slowly, his usual confidence shattered. Your Honor, I was not personally aware of the specific conversations between our representatives and Mrs. Lee. Then perhaps Mr. Wilson can enlighten us, Judge Winters suggested, looking directly at Riverbend's CEO. Mr. Wilson, as the head of Riverbend Development, were you aware that your representatives were making false claims about eminent domain to pressure elderly homeowners into selling? The CEO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your Honor, I would need to consult with counsel before responding to such allegations. I'm sure you would, Judge Winters said dryly. However, this recording speaks for itself. She turned back to Alex. Mr. Lee, in light of this new evidence, I'm inclined to rule in your favor regarding the validity of your grandmother's contract with Riverbend. However, before I make my final ruling, I believe the plaintiff deserves one last opportunity to respond. Blackwell conferred quickly with his clients, then approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of these developments, Riverbend would like to propose a revised settlement offer. Proceed, Judge Winters said. Riverbend will return Mrs. Lee's property immediately, refund the full purchase price with interest, and cover all her legal expenses related to this matter. Judge Winters turned to Alex. Mr. Lee, your response? Alex stood, feeling all eyes in the courtroom on him. Yesterday, he would have accepted this offer in a heartbeat. Today, after everything he'd learned, it wasn't enough. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. While I appreciate Riverbend's offer to return my grandmother's property, I cannot accept a settlement that includes a confidentiality agreement. The recording we heard today suggests that what happened to my grandmother may have happened to others as well. Blackwell quickly interjected, Your Honor, no confidentiality agreement was mentioned in our current offer. But it would be included in the final settlement papers, wouldn't it, Mr. Blackwell? Alex challenged. Blackwell's silence was answer enough. Your Honor, Alex continued, I believe this case has implications beyond my grandmother's property. I request that the court not only void the contract but also order an investigation into Riverbend's other land acquisitions, particularly those involving elderly homeowners. Judge Winters studied Alex thoughtfully. That's quite a request, Mr. Lee. Typically, the court would limit its ruling to the specific case before it. I understand, Your Honor. But if Riverbend used the same tactics with other elderly people? Alex paused, gathering his thoughts. This isn't just about real estate anymore. It's about protecting vulnerable people from predatory practices. An unexpected voice spoke up from the plaintiff's table. I'd like to say something, Your Honor. Everyone turned in surprise to see a young woman standing, the executive assistant who had been sitting quietly beside Riverbend's CEO throughout the proceedings. And you are? Judge Winters asked. Lisa Chen, Your Honor. I've worked as Mr. Wilson's executive assistant at Riverbend for the past 3 years. Judge Winters nodded. Go ahead, Ms. Chen. Lisa took a deep breath. What Mr. Lee is saying is true. Riverbend has a specific strategy for acquiring properties from elderly homeowners. They call it the Gray Gold program internally. The courtroom fell completely silent. Wilson's face had gone from red to white in seconds. Ms. Chen, I must advise. Blackwell began, but Judge Winters cut him off. Mr. Blackwell, Ms. Chen is speaking to the court. You will have your opportunity to respond. Lisa continued, her voice stronger now. I've seen the documents. They specifically target people over 75 who live alone, especially those showing signs of memory issues or confusion. They have a training program for representatives on how to pressure these people into selling. Wilson half rose from his seat, his face contorted with anger. That's enough, he snapped. Mr. Wilson, Judge Winters said sharply, one more outburst and I will have you removed from my courtroom. Wilson sank back into his chair, seething. Blackwell looked like he might faint. Lisa turned to Alex. I heard about what happened in court yesterday, a teenager fighting against Riverbend. It was all over the office this morning. And then when I saw you today standing up to them even when they offered to settle, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Judge Winters leaned forward. Ms. Chen, would you be willing to provide a formal statement regarding these allegations? Yes, Your Honor, Lisa replied. And I have documentation, files that Mr. Wilson doesn't know I've copied. The CEO lunged to his feet. She's lying. This is corporate espionage. Bailiff, Judge Winters said calmly, please escort Mr. Wilson out of my courtroom. As the bailiff led the protesting CEO away, Judge Winters surveyed the scene before her. What had begun as a routine property dispute had evolved into something much larger. In light of these serious allegations, she announced, this court will take the following actions. First, the contract between Riverbend Development and Mrs. Lee is hereby declared null and void due to fraudulent misrepresentation. The property shall be returned to Mrs. Lee immediately, along with the full purchase price plus interest. She paused, then continued. Second, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal fraud. Third, I am ordering all Riverbend documents related to their property acquisition strategies preserved as potential evidence. Judge Winters looked directly at Alex. Mr. Lee, the court commends your persistence in this matter. Your willingness to stand up not only for your grandmother but potentially for many other vulnerable individuals is admirable. She turned to the bailiff. Please escort Ms. Chen to my chambers. I'll want to hear her full statement. Then, to the courtroom at large. This court is adjourned. As people began filing out, Alex stood motionless, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had come to court yesterday expecting to lose his grandmother's land forever. Now, not only was the land returned, but he might have helped expose a company-wide scheme targeting the elderly. Tom appeared at his side, smiling broadly. Well done, counselor. I'm not a lawyer, Alex reminded him. Could have fooled me, Tom replied, and half the people in this courtroom. As they gathered Alex's papers, Blackwell approached their table. The confident attorney from yesterday was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years and 2 days. Mr. Lee, he said stiffly, I want to assure you that I had no knowledge of any systematic targeting of elderly homeowners. Had I known, would it have made a difference? Alex asked quietly. Blackwell didn't answer. After an uncomfortable moment, he simply nodded once and walked away. Outside the courtroom, reporters had somehow already gathered, alerted to the dramatic developments. Alex hesitated at the door, unprepared for the flurry of questions that awaited him. Go on, Tom encouraged him. They need to hear this story. As Alex stepped forward to face the cameras, he caught sight of his reflection in a window. Still young, still in his slightly rumpled clothes, but standing taller now, with a new confidence in his eyes. The boy who had entered this courthouse yesterday barely knowing how to address a judge was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who had discovered that sometimes, against all odds, justice could still prevail. Camera flashes lit up the courthouse steps as Alex stood before a cluster of reporters. Microphones pointed at him from every direction, and questions overlapped in a chaotic jumble. After 2 days of intense legal battles, this new challenge left him momentarily speechless. A reassuring hand touched his shoulder. Tom had followed him out, and now stood beside him, a steady presence amid the chaos. Just speak from the heart, Tom advised quietly. Tell them why this matters. Alex took a deep breath and raised his hand for quiet. Surprisingly, the reporters fell silent, waiting. 2 days ago, I came to this courthouse thinking I'd already lost, Alex began, his voice growing stronger with each word. I wasn't a lawyer. I was just a 19-year-old kid trying to save my grandmother's home. But what I discovered goes beyond one piece of land. He explained in simple terms how Riverbend had targeted his grandmother, and potentially many others like her. Elderly people living alone, people beginning to struggle with memory issues, people vulnerable to pressure and deception. This wasn't just business, Alex said, his passion evident in every word. This was taking advantage of people who deserved protection. My grandmother worked her whole life for that land. She raised my mom there. She raised me there after my parents died. That house isn't just property. It's our history, our memories. Questions erupted again. Alex pointed to a reporter in the front. What made you decide to fight this in court by yourself? Alex smiled slightly. Necessity, mostly. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and legal aid was overwhelmed with cases. But also, he paused, thinking. I believed someone needed to stand up for my grandmother. I just never expected it would lead to exposing something this big. Another reporter called out, What happens next with Riverbend? That's up to the district attorney now, Alex replied. But I hope every contract they've made with elderly homeowners gets reviewed. This wasn't just about getting my grandmother's land back anymore. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else's grandmother. As the questions continued, Alex noticed Tom slipping away through the crowd. He tried to catch his eye, but the older man disappeared around the corner of the building. After answering a few more questions, Alex excused himself, promising to speak with reporters again after he'd had time to process everything. He hurried around the side of the courthouse looking for Tom. He found him in the small garden area, sitting on a bench beneath a maple tree. Hey, Alex said, approaching. You disappeared. I wanted to thank you properly. Tom smiled. You seemed to be handling the press just fine without me. None of this would have happened without your help. Alex sat beside him. Those legal references you gave me, the advice about courtroom procedure, how do you know all that stuff anyway? Were you really just a court reporter? Tom looked at him for a long moment as if making a decision. Then he reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Alex. Thomas J. Reynolds, Alex read aloud. Attorney at law. He looked up in surprise. You're a lawyer? Retired now, Tom said. But yes, I practiced for over 40 years before stepping back last year. But why didn't you tell me? And why help me at all? Tom leaned back on the bench, gazing up at the leaves overhead. I've known about Riverbend's tactics for a while. They approached my sister last year, same playbook they used with your grandmother. I managed to stop it before she signed anything, but it got me looking into their patterns. He turned to Alex. I've been gathering evidence, building a case, but I'm just one retired attorney with limited resources. I needed something more visible. Understanding dawned on Alex. You used me as bait. I gave you tools, Tom corrected gently. You did the rest yourself. Honestly, I expected you to take their first settlement offer. I never imagined you'd push it this far or that their assistant would come forward. Alex wasn't sure whether to feel angry or impressed. So all that stuff about being a court reporter? Not entirely a lie. I did work as a court reporter before, law school a lifetime ago. Tom smiled. And I do still come to the courthouse out of habit. Old lawyers never really retire. We just find different ways to fight the battles that matter. Alex shook his head, processing this revelation. So, what happens now? Now, Tom said, the real work begins. That assistant Lisa, she's going to need protection. Whistleblowers often face retaliation, and there are probably dozens of cases like your grandmother's that need to be reviewed. And you'll be handling all that? Alex asked. Not alone. Tom fixed him with a thoughtful look. How would you feel about a job, Alex? My firm could use someone with your research skills and determination. It wouldn't pay much to start, but it would be meaningful work. Alex blinked in surprise. You want me to work for your law firm? I'm not even in college yet. Paralegals don't need law degrees, Tom pointed out. Just intelligence, attention to detail, and a passion for justice. You've demonstrated all three. Alex hesitated, then smiled. Can I think about it? Of course. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Tom stood, shouldering his bag. Now, don't you have a grandmother to go tell some good news to? The small nursing home was quiet in the late afternoon. Alex walked the familiar hallway to his grandmother's room, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. The events of the past 2 days felt almost dreamlike now, but the folder of court documents in his hand proved it had all really happened. He found his grandmother by the window, as usual, looking out at the small garden. At 83, Grace Lee was physically frail, but on her good days, glimpses of her strong spirit still shone through. Grandma? Alex said softly, pulling a chair beside her. It's me, Alex. She turned slowly, her eyes taking a moment to focus. Today seemed to be one of her better days as recognition dawned quickly. Alex, you're late for dinner. He smiled. Dinner had been hours ago, but he didn't correct her. I have some news, Grandma. Good news. Did you find a job? She asked, patting his hand. Even better. I got your house back. Her brow furrowed in confusion. My house? Patiently, Alex explained about Riverbend, the court case, and Judge Winter's ruling. He kept the details simple, knowing that too much information would only confuse her. What mattered was the result. Her home was hers. Again, as he spoke, something remarkable happened. His grandmother's eyes grew clearer, more focused, as if the fog of confusion was temporarily lifting. I remember those men, she said suddenly. They kept coming back, telling me I had to sell. Alex nodded encouragingly. That's right, Grandma. But it's all taken care of now. The judge said their contract was no good because they lied to you. Grace straightened in her chair, a flash of her old self emerging. Of course they lied. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I just couldn't remember the right words to fight back. Alex squeezed her hand, his throat tight with emotion. Well, I found the words for you. She studied his face. You look tired, dear. It's been a long couple of days, he admitted. But you won. It wasn't a question. We won, Alex corrected. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Tell me how. I want to hear everything. So Alex settled in and told her the whole story. The intimidating first day, meeting Tom, the late-night research, and the dramatic courtroom showdown. He wasn't sure how much she would follow or remember, but it felt important to share it with her. To his surprise, she listened attentively, asking questions that showed she was tracking the story better than she had followed any conversation. In months, you stood up to a judge and all those fancy lawyers, she asked, pride evident in her voice. I did. It was terrifying at first, but then, I don't know, something clicked, like I found my voice. Grace nodded slowly. You sound like your grandfather. He never backed down from a fight when it mattered. I wish I'd known him, Alex said softly. He would have been so proud of you. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. I'm proud of you. Those simple words meant more than all the judge's praise or the reporter's attention. Alex felt tears prick at his eyes. So what happens now? Grace asked. Well, legally the house is yours again, but... Alex hesitated. They both knew she couldn't live there anymore. Her care needs were too complex. But I'll stay here, she finished for him. That's all right? I'm used to it now. Alex nodded. But we could fix up the house. Maybe I could live there, take care of it. And you could visit whenever you want. I'd like that. Her eyes drifted back to the window. Plant some new flowers in the front garden, the yellow ones. Daffodils, Alex supplied. Your favorite? Yes, daffodils. She smiled distantly. And what about you? What will you do now besides gardening? Alex thought about Tom's job offer, about the satisfaction he'd felt standing up in court, about the fire that had awakened in him during this fight. I think I might want to study law, he said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. Help other people who need someone to speak for them. Grace nodded as if this made perfect sense. You'll be good at that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the garden in warm hues of gold and amber. Alex knew his grandmother might not remember this conversation tomorrow, but right now, in this moment, they were connected by a shared victory and a reclaimed legacy. 6 months later, Alex stood on the porch of his grandmother's, now his, restored house. Fresh paint brightened the old clapboards and daffodils nodded in the spring breeze along the front walk. Grace sat in a comfortable chair beside him, wrapped in a light blanket despite the warm day. It looks just like I remember, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Alex had brought her home for the day, a special outing approved by her care facility. These visits had become monthly events, weather permitting. Sometimes she remembered the house instantly. Other times it took her a while to recognize her old home. Today was a good day. His phone buzzed with a text message from Tom. Court filing complete. Wells' family case proceeds to hearing next week. Need your research by Thursday? Alex smiled as he typed a quick acknowledgement. His work at Reynolds Legal Advocacy had quickly grown from part-time to full-time. They specialized now in cases involving elderly victims of corporate predation. The Riverbend scandal had opened a floodgate, with similar cases emerging across the state. He'd started community college classes too, focusing on pre-law. The path ahead was long, 4 years of college, then law school, but for the first time in his life, Alex had a clear vision of his future. Everything okay? Grace asked, noticing his distraction. Everything's perfect, Alex assured her, tucking the phone away. Just work stuff. Your lawyer job, she said with a proud smile. Not a lawyer yet, Grandma. Just helping the real lawyers. She waved this distinction away. You will be. You found your calling in that courtroom. Alex couldn't argue with that. What had begun as a desperate last stand to save his grandmother's property had transformed into something much bigger. A purpose. A path forward. And the discovery of strength he never knew he possessed. He thought back to that first day in court, when Judge Winters had looked down at him with such dismissive skepticism. How things had changed. Last week, he'd run into her at the courthouse and she'd stopped to ask about his classes and his work with Tom. The law needs more people who care about justice, not just procedure, she'd told him. Don't lose that fire, Mr. Lee. Sitting beside his grandmother on the porch of the home he'd fought for and won, Alex knew he never would.